On November 10th at 6:52 p.m., rush hour traffic near Delhi's Red Fort turned into a scene of carnage. A white Hyundai i20 exploded near gate number 1 of the Red Fort metro station. 13 people died instantly, dozens more were injured. The investigation moved fast. DNA evidence identified the driver, a medical professional from Kashmir who had studied and worked in Faridabad and Delhi. Further investigation revealed a network of such doctors, educated professionals operating from within legitimate institutions. It also revealed a disturbing trend, a white-collar terror module funded through illicit channels using encrypted apps and silent emails to stay invisible. In this episode, we unpack what happened and what it means for India. We also try to understand how terrorism itself is evolving across the world through a chaos of ideologies, influences, and identities. It's Tuesday, the 18th of November. I'm Anirban Chowdhury. This is The Morning Brief. To understand how investigators cracked this case, I spoke to Hakeem Irfan Rashid, ET's key tracker of events in Jammu and Kashmir. Irfan's been following this trail from the very beginning. I asked him about the first signs that led the police to this network.
Anirban, actually on 19th of October, police found some of the posters of Jaish-e-Mohammed organizations on some walls in Banpura area of Naugam, which is on the outskirts of the Srinagar on the highway. So when police found these posters of Jaish-e-Mohammed, they immediately registered an FIR and started investigating the case. It led them to 3 individuals who are from the same Naugam area. So they led to a local imam who led the prayers in a nearby masjid. This imam is actually from southern Kashmir, Shopian area of southern Kashmir, but he was here leading prayers for a couple of years in a local masjid. So police got to that imam and then they seized the electronic gadgets of these 3 individuals and the imam as well. In his phone, there were contacts of some doctors and there was some other material they found on his phone. And that's where they reached to the doctor from South Kashmir, the Dr. Adil. And that's how they cracked the group of doctors who were allegedly involved in the explosives, as well as in that later got connected with the Delhi blast.
If you notice the dates, the probe had started at least a month before the blast. In fact, 3,000 kilos of explosives were seized from Faridabad just hours before the incident. The blast, of course, still happened, a solo act of desperation, many are saying. But it could have probably been much, much more serious. After the incident, investigations quickly focused on the driver of the vehicle.
Dr. Umar, he was from GMC Medical College, Government Medical College, Srinagar, which is a prestigious medical college. You get there, that is the top priority in J&K, and you get there after qualifying the NEET examinations. He had qualified that. He had done his MD, Masters in the medicine field from that same college. Another Dr. Muzammil is again from an Acharya Shri Chandra Medical College from Jammu.
Aside of Dr. Muzammil Ganai, who's from Pulwama, the other names are Dr. Adil Ahmed Rathar from Kulgam, Dr. Muhammad Arif, and Dr. Shaheen Saeed, who is supposed to be linked with the women's recruitment wing of the terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is suspected to be responsible for the blast.
She is from Lucknow, but all of them were working in Al-Falah University and its medical college and the hospital. That is the common connection between all of these doctors who are being picked up. So these doctors have worked in government institutions in Kashmir before moving to Al-Falah.
The common link, of course, is the Al-Falah University.
Al-Falah was a recognized university. It was recognized by the Association of Universities and it was recognized by the UGC. So this is a proper university which was emerging as a very important academic center and all. So they have issued a statement from that university as well, saying that they were discharging their professional duties there. They don't have any information, anything else of their any other involvement. So doctors had a proper academic record. They had no prior involvement anywhere else, especially those who are from Kashmir. So they had no previous record and all. So all of these things are now coming out while police is investigating the case.
The police have questioned 2,000 people, mostly students so far. Now, what is this disturbing white-collar terrorism? Doctors, engineers, professors, people who have passed competitive exams, who treat patients, who teach students. They use their credentials as camouflage, their professional networks as cover, and their expertise to build bombs or move money without raising flags. This is not new, of course. Al-Qaeda's Ayman al-Zawahiri was a surgeon. ISIS's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi held a PhD. What makes this terrifying for security agencies is simple. These actors do not fit the obvious profile of a terrorist. A white coat and medical faculty ID signifies lives saved, not taken. In a few minutes into this episode, we will get into how terrorism across the world is changing and why it's becoming so difficult to identify and thus prevent a terrorist. But before that, let's understand how terrorism has evolved in South Asia and who are the most dangerous actors. Dr. Christine Fair is a professor in the Peace and Security Studies program at Georgetown University. Her research focuses on political and military affairs in South Asia. Here's Dr. Fair talking about terrorist groups that have come up in what is still said to be the biggest nurturing space, Pakistan.
I think one of the biggest developments is coming out of Pakistan with the Tehreek-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan, which obviously goes back to 2007, 2008. The reason why I think that's a very important development is that the Pakistani state had been largely using Islamist militancy as tools of foreign policy in Afghanistan as well as in Kashmir without any blowback, without any consequences whatsoever. And obviously that changed with the TTP. I think a second major development in Pakistan has really been the TLP, which is, the shorthand for the Labbaik movement. I think for much of Pakistan's history, when we talked about sectarian or anti-state violence, we were really talking about Deobandi violence. All the groups that were killing Shia, like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, Sipe-Sabe, Pakistan, they all came out of the Deobandi tradition.
The Deobandi tradition, originating in 19th century India, emphasizes conservative Islamic principles and has greatly influenced radical groups in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Many Taliban leaders and cadres were educated in Deobandi madrasas, which served as ideological and recruiting grounds for militant activities in both countries. But here's a group following a completely different ideology.
The TLP represents a militancy of the Barelvi tradition, which is widely believed to be the majority.
So the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, or TLP, is a hardline Islamist party founded in 2015 that follows the Barelvi tradition of Sunni Islam. TLP is known for strict defense of blasphemy laws, mass protests, and advocating for Sharia-based governance while centering their ideology on protecting the honor of Prophet Muhammad. What is significant is while Deobandi groups have led organized insurgencies and major terror attacks, Barelvi-linked violence is mainly mob-driven or over blasphemy issues, rarely insurgent. So their inclusion in the fold shows a spread of insurgency across ideologies. According to the Global Terrorism Index 2025, deaths and attacks caused by the Tehreek-e-Taliban jumped 90% in 2024, and they were all in Pakistan. In 2024, this group was responsible for over half the terror attacks. That's 482 attacks and 585 deaths. The other active group is the Islamic State Khorasan Province, ISK or ISIS-K. Founded in 2015 by defectors from Taliban and Al-Qaeda factions, ISK is known for brutal attacks targeting the Taliban, Pakistani government, and minorities opposing both local governments and competing jihadi groups. The group uses suicide bombings. According to the index, as of 2024, the Islamic State was active in 22 countries, and the ISK is definitely not a rogue offshoot.
It's definitely a real thing in Afghanistan. It is an offshoot, unlike its brethren in Southwest Asia. These guys largely are coming from the Deoband tradition. What we've seen, the Pakistani Taliban relative to the Afghan Taliban is much more anti-Shia radicalization. So it would be natural that these anti-Shia organizations would have a lot of pull towards ISKP, given that it is inherently a sectarian organization.
The other organizations include, of course, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish, but also the Haqqani Network and Sipah-e-Sahaba Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan's inconsistent crackdowns and domestic tolerance allow extremist groups to reorganize and expand, leading to daily violence and civilian harm. This brazen state nurturing of terrorism has made Pakistan rank second globally in terror impacts in the Global Terrorism Index 2025.
I also think what has changed, and this is a function of nuclearization, but Pakistan has become a lot more emboldened in terms of the sorts of terror attacks that it feels like it can sponsor without consequence. The crises and the escalation of the crises have become much more dangerous. So I think the conflict cycles in South Asia have become much more risky than they have in the past. Components of the Pakistani Taliban are from these groups that have enjoyed various degrees of state backing. It can no longer use these groups without consequence. But what I think is very fascinating is that it tells you how important these groups are to Pakistan, that they have not moved to decisively eliminate them, even though they are a source of domestic threat. The Pakistani state's willing to lose civilians, innocent men, women, and children, so that Pakistan can continue using these terror assets. I find that fascinating.
Now, in the last decade, India has become less vulnerable to terrorist attacks than it was. Since 2016, its ranking in terms of terrorism impact on the index has dropped 7 places to number 14, but it's still very vulnerable.
I would say India remains vulnerable for a bunch of reasons. India's law enforcement agencies have really just failed to modernize. I remember a number of years ago, I took a team of cadets from West Point to meet with counterterrorism officials in Mumbai. And they told me that Mumbai was no more prepared for an event like 2008 than it was in 2008. So I think India's law enforcement agencies remain very vulnerable. When you're dealing with like the events that you saw in Delhi, policing is what matters. And when you're still dealing with policing that are not in this century, you're going to be opening yourselves up to vulnerability. It takes a lot of resources to prevent terrorism. And it doesn't just take money. As I said, it takes training, it takes weapons, it takes intelligence. And so I do think India remains very vulnerable.
Now, everything we've spoken about yet, from white-collar terrorism to the continued proliferation of extremism in South Asia, are all part of a global shift. To understand this shift better, I spoke to Dr. John Horgan, a psychologist who's been studying terrorism and political violence for 30 years. I started by asking him the 3 ways in which he thinks terrorism has changed globally in the last 3 years.
One of the constant features of terrorism is that it is always changing. However, I've never seen as many changes as I've seen occurring in the last few years, and it's for a number of reasons. I mean, I think the internet and social media in particular have completely revolutionized terrorism. Small, localized terrorist groups that one time might have been, let's say, limited to a tiny corner of the world, now have access to a potentially global footprint. They can push their propaganda out onto the world stage. And from our perspective, as people who, look at what terrorists do, I mean, it can make us feel more vulnerable. Another way in which I think terrorism has really changed profoundly in recent years is that we're seeing many, many, many younger people now get involved in ways that we just wouldn't have seen before. We're seeing more and more adolescents feeling empowered by the internet, feeling that there are things that they can do on behalf of terrorist groups online. And they have even ascended into leadership positions because of the opportunities that the internet affords them. And the third big change I would point to is it's a rather odd one, but it's one that seems to be growing in extent. For reasons I think we don't truly understand, but we're seeing a mixing of ideologies. So 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't that difficult to understand terrorist motivation. They were either left-wing or right-wing or religious or ethno-nationalist or something like that. Well, today it's pretty common for terrorist actors, especially lone actors, to commit to a wide array of ideologies. Some here in the US have referred to it as salad bar ideology. A number of academics, I think, have tried to make sense of it, but I think some of this is driven by the internet, and some of it, quite frankly, is driven by people who, for all kinds of reasons, they just want to go out and commit an act of massive violence, and they're looking for an excuse to do it. They're looking for an ideology to latch on to justify what they're doing.
Okay, John, now the world is seeing more conflicts than it has since World War II. What kind of impact do you think that has on the economics, ideologies, and politics of terrorism?
Yeah, I think so. When we mostly use the word terrorism, as you said, we're talking about insurgent groups or movements that are trying to get some sort of a shift, typically a shift in government policy. They often do what they do because they are trying to stand up for a community that they view as victimized. But terrorism as a strategy can be used just as easily by state actors. On the one hand, we're seeing a very isolationist worldview by the US right now via the Trump administration. And I think that is seen by some rather as offering potential opportunities for malevolent actors worldwide. We've seen how emboldened Russia has become in Ukraine for using terrorist tactics in different arenas, different theaters. So it can be a profoundly effective strategy, at least in the short term, for promoting goals. But we are seeing, North Korea, Iran, Russia, and many other countries now, re-engage Israel, re-engage on the world stage. So state actors have used terrorist tactics and terrorism as a strategy for a very, very, very long time, and far longer than non-state groups have used the strategy.
Now, John, the Global Terrorism Index 2025 notes that 90% of attacks usually occur in conflict zones. Does this suggest that terrorism is more symptomatic than a cause of conflict? And also, should global policy shift from counterterrorism per se to conflict resolution, and that would automatically, control terrorism as well?
The short answer is no, I don't think so. One of the real challenges in thinking about terrorism is that it forces us to accept the fact that there's no one solution is going to work. So in some context, we're going to need what some people sort of euphemistically call a kinetic counterterrorism response, which by and large, means killing people or at least apprehending them. I would be very slow to advocate that we sort of move from one response paradigm to another just because of what's happening right now. I've seen and I've read that same report that you just cited. Yes, I agree with that interpretation of the data, but I agree with it for 2025. That is an accurate description, but this world can change very quickly. There is a broad consensus right now that despite the sort of this slow bubbling up of small regional conflicts that threaten to destabilize whole regions, terrorism seems to be on the decline. And at the same time, we should be ready for it to bounce back at any moment. So it's just one of those strategies that comes and goes. And one of my colleagues used to refer to it as waves. It comes in waves and it goes in waves.
Would you say it's becoming more and more difficult to identify a potential terrorist?
I think that's one of the hardest questions we've had. Certainly as a researcher, it's one of the hardest questions. I think the real question isn't so much why do people get involved in terrorism? It's why do so few people get involved in terrorism? Because they're given the root causes, given the sort of the big structural conditions that sort of create this chaos, create this instability, create all of these opportunities for people to express their grievances with other like-minded people. One would think that there would be a lot more people involved in terrorism, and fortunately there aren't. And so I think that for me is really being one of the harder questions to wrap our heads around here.
Got it. Okay, you mentioned internet and how big it is as an influence in newer forms of terrorism. Now, what about AI? deep fakes, cloned voices, multilingual propaganda? How's that changing radicalization?
Yeah, whenever we talk about technology and terrorism, I think there's an acknowledgement that terrorists tend to be very good first adopters. They will try different technologies. They will, they'll be quick to use new technologies and exploit them for different purposes. So far, I've seen a relatively slow uptake of AI by terrorist groups. And it might be that right now they simply don't need it. There's been no shortage of sort of experimentation by isolated individuals who, use AI clients, chatbot clients in particular, to come up with ideas to test or challenge security protocols. And, we also see genuine actors with malevolent intent using AI tools for this purpose. But so far, the uptake on AI in particular has been slow. And I don't have a good answer as to why that's been slow, but it just might be that right now they don't quite need it. That may change, but we'll see.
John, what do you think about the lone actor format of terrorism? It's been growing. It's been becoming more and more popular. It started in the West. It seemed to be quite effective. And it seems to be spreading now outside of the West.
Certainly, lone actor terrorism. We've seen lone actor terrorism worldwide. Is it more effective? I mean, on the one hand, it might seem to be more frightening because there is this assumption that, we can't see it coming and they could strike anywhere at any time, etc. I mean, to an extent...
I was referring to the index again, which said it's has been much more effective than the group-led.
No, so on the whole, I would say no, it's not. That's not the case.
Okay.
I mean, there have been exceptional events where lone actors have been able to wreak incredible damage, but for the most part, we see greater lethality associated with people who are clearly part of network and part of a hierarchical structure where they have access to training. They have access to other people in the network who can supply them with things, who can help them themselves identify targets or prepare for targeting, et cetera, et cetera. So on the whole, no. I mean, there are, for every example of a successful lone actor terrorist attack, there are many more attacks that are the subject of intervention or have been foiled or failed, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I also want to point out that it is a myth that we don't see lone actor terrorism coming. We do. Almost 2/3 of lone actor terrorists leak their intention and their behavior to bystanders, whether it's friends or family members or co-workers or colleagues, but they tend to tell people what they're going to do. And whether, again, there are lots of potential explanations for it. That is ironically what makes lone actor terrorism, from one perspective at least, far less threatening, far less potentially lethal, because we can detect their behavior. We can see it coming. The problem here is that we don't see enough people reporting that suspicious behavior. So it's not that we don't see it coming, it's just we don't, in many cases we're not seeing a good enough connection between bystanders, authorities, in terms of making those suspicions known.
Got it. Finally, John, 3 ways in which the West especially and the rest of the world are not tackling terrorism too well.
I could give you many ways. I don't think the West does a very good job of tackling terrorism at all. I think we create more terrorists than we defeat or prevent. Some of the things the West is very, very good at are, using conventional kinetic military and law enforcement means to disrupt or in some cases prevent terrorism from taking place. But very often counterterrorism is done in flagrant disregard for human rights. That often ends up creating more support for terrorist causes, if not in some cases at least, driving more support into the arms of a particular terrorist group. When we talk about counterterrorism, the number one mantra is do no harm. If you're going to respond to it, at least do so in a way that isn't going to make the problem even worse. And we see this particularly when it comes to terrorism that involves a terrorist group representing an ethnic or religious or other community that is victimized. And so Another thing that we don't do particularly well anymore is to think about prevention. We need to do a far better job of ensuring that communities in whose name terrorist actors do what they do have other means of having their voices heard. And I think, despite the fact that we have seen now literally centuries of poor responses to terrorism by states, we don't seem to be very good at learning the lessons of history in terms of not just what to do, but more to the point, what not to do.
John's point cuts deep. We are creating more terrorists than we are stopping. The Delhi car blast exposed exactly that failure. Was Dr. Umar Mohammed radicalized in some remote training camp? Possibly not. But he was definitely educated in a legit, registered, recognized medical college. He worked in government hospitals, and then he built a bomb in a university campus. India has responded fast with raids. The investigation, of course, continues, and more arrests will happen. But as Christine warned, our law enforcement has not modernized enough. And as John reminded us, the constant state of war in this world, the internet, and state-sponsored violence just keep feeding that cycle until perhaps no one will even recognize where the next threat to human life may come from. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by me and Rajas Naik, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday on your favorite listening platform. Also, listen to our new show, Corner Office Conversation, where we speak to the most interesting business and thought leaders from India and the world. Stay tuned.